Enough is enough. The numbers show something ain't right. We're getting screwed here. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deeper in the corner. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it, and in, touchdown, Knight again.
Schultz just before Brazil got him.
And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Colliger at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number. And he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
And greetings, Go Blue. I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to another edition of Michigan Podcast. Please excuse the voice. I'm getting over a sinus infection, but hey, it's better than it was yesterday. So thank you for tuning in here today as we cover all things Michigan sports. And of course, we thank you so much for subscribing here on YouTube, also on iTunes. Please write us a positive review if you like us. Now, we would never ask you to lie. So if you don't like us, just don't say anything. It kind of hurts our feelings, the negative feedback, so just pretend like we're not here. But if you do like us, please give us a review, 4 or 5 stars. It helps us to get the word out. Subscribe here on iTunes and also on YouTube as well. We love hearing from you each and every day. You can follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. If you miss anything we do at all, MichiganPodcast.com. That's sort of the clearinghouse. That's where everything gets stored, everything we've ever done, written, said, etc. You can catch all of it right there at MichiganPodcast.com. We're going to have plenty of analysis of Michigan's big win against Minnesota when it darn near made history. We almost, for the first time in school history, saw 2 running backs get over 100 or 200 yards in the same game. Michael Spath from the Michigan Insider and Inside the Huddle on WTKA Ann Arbor. He'll be joining us. We'll have another edition of Football 101 as former All-Big Ten tight end Benny Jopper will break down the film of Michigan's victory over Minnesota, and we'll take a look ahead to the big game against Maryland as well as where things stand in the college football playoff. Rankings due out here tonight. We tape this on Tuesday afternoons, and also in the Big Ten as well. So a lot to get to, but I want to start with this. And before I do, a disclaimer, okay? If you've been around me on the various Michigan message boards over the years, a lot of fans don't like me. And it's because I'm not into victimology. I'm not into it's somebody else's fault. To use a word of Coach Harbaugh's favorite term, I'm in a meritocracy, okay? I think there's no argument scoreboard doesn't win. When I used to host a sports talk radio show back in the day, I was never one for, if we hadn't committed turnovers, those were called takeaways. Sometimes you just drop it, Amir Abdullah. Sometimes you just drop the ball. Most of the time, though, it is taken away from you. Okay, so I'm not one to complain and to whine. It's not my default setting. My default setting is to be too critical of my own team Because to me, when you control your own destiny, it's on you, man. And if you let other people take control away from you, that's on you too. But every once in a while, the feces has been piled so high, something smells so rotten in the state of Denmark, Hamlet, that something must be said. Because something ain't right about these numbers, and we saw it again against Minnesota on Saturday night. I want to walk you through some statistics. And bear in mind, this is the actual data now, all right? This isn't whining. This isn't lamenting. These are facts. Michigan ranks 14th in the Big Ten in penalties against this season. But they are only 13th. That's dead last, by the way. But they are only 13th in the Big Ten in opponents' penalties against. So, on one hand, you could say, well, Michigan's a young team. Probably the youngest team in the Big Ten. Maybe the youngest team in the Power Five, and young teams are more indisciplined and commit more penalties. Okay, I'll buy that. Then explain to me why we are second to last in opponents' penalties against. And this isn't a one-year trend. How about 2016, when we had all those seniors, 42 of them? Michigan was 13th, second to last in the Big Ten in penalties last year. We were dead last in opponents' penalties against. Want to credit the Wolverine for those stats, by the way. So what was the excuse last year with 42 seniors on the roster? What was the excuse? Yeah, you could say, well, it's the same coach. Maybe Jim Harbaugh is undisciplined. Well, he really wasn't known for coaching undisciplined teams at the 49ers or Stanford, but okay, we'll go with that then too. Well, if that's your explanation, explain to me why 2 years in a row Michigan is last or second to last in the amount of penalties called on its opponents. Hot damn. We just must bring out the best in people. Everybody plays their cleanest game against us. It's just incredible. What a tremendous blessing we are on the rest of the teams on our schedule, that you just see that winged helmet and you play your cleanest game every freaking week, every week. Really? For 2 years? But those aren't the only data points I want to bring up to you here today. Here's some more. Pro Football Focus, which to me is the place to go for football data analytics. They say Rashawn Gary is one of the top 5 pass rushers in college football. He's had one holding penalty called against who was blocking him this season. One. So it's really incredible. I mean, according to Pro Football Focus, Rashawn Gary is getting pressure on the quarterback on almost half his snaps this season. That's insane, guys. That's video game stuff. So I know we look at, as fans, we're looking at sacks and stuff, but scouts are looking at how many times do you get there, because you getting there, even if you don't get the sack, probably causes somebody else to, right? Well, Pro Football Focus is saying that Rashawn Gary is pressuring the quarterback on almost half his snaps, and yet he's received one holding call on the opponent all year. It's just incredible. What an incredible trend that is. Half the time, Rashawn Gary pressures the quarterback. The other half of the time, he is blocked perfectly. That's amazing, really. Again, he just really must bring out the best in people, really. How about this stat? Last year in the Ohio State game, we sacked them 8 times, yet Ohio State didn't get called for one holding penalty. So last year against Ohio State, they ran the ball 50 times. We had 8 sacks. They didn't get called for holding once. It's really, truly incredible, actually. I mean, when you think about getting 8 sacks in a game is insane enough, particularly against a team as good as Ohio State was last year. And then just amazingly, their offensive line at Ohio State just blocked perfectly on all of the other plays. That's really fascinating, one eyebrow Spock. It's amazing how they could manage that. So really, they only had 8 breakdowns on the offensive line for Ohio State all game. They just happened to be the 8 plays we got sacks, and all those other plays, including the 50 running plays on a team they couldn't pass pro against, Ohio State just did swell, right? Except that's not a one-off either. Let's get to the next stat. Last Saturday, we had 13 tackles for loss against Minnesota. 13. One guy, Khaleke Hudson, had 8. Yet the Gophers weren't called for a single holding penalty. It's crazy. I want to congratulate Minnesota. Congratulate your offensive line. Other than the 13 plays you gave up tackles for loss, you clearly blocked perfectly and cleanly. Amazing technique. I'm not sure who the University of Minnesota offensive line coach is, but that's a coaching clinic right there. I mean, only 13 mistakes, and all the rest of the game, they just did great. That's beautiful. What is that velvet? That's just, let me tell you what it is. It's a freaking crock is what it is. Now, I don't know what it means. I don't know what's causing it. What I do know is that's garbage. That's horse pucky. Something about that ain't right. You want to say we're undisciplined? Fine. I watch every minute of every game. I think I've proven on this podcast I don't mind levying criticism when I think it's appropriate. At times this year, we've been undisciplined. At times last year, discipline, we had issues. Discipline, not one of them. Not with 42 seniors. But fine, you want to say that? You want to knock Harbaugh, say that his teams are undisciplined? That's not true. But okay, then explain why 2 years in a row the team playing us doesn't get called for very many penalties. 2 years in a row, we're near the bottom of the league in that. This year we are last. Last year we were second to last. How in the world do you explain that? Everybody just plays their cleanest game against us. Ohio State gave up 8 sacks to us last year, but they didn't hold the whole game. No wonder Taco Charlton shouldn't have been a first-round pick. He should have been the number 1 overall pick then if he was that good. That on their perfect technique pass pro, he still managed to get all those sacks despite how perfectly and cleanly Ohio State was blocking. Amazing. Minnesota couldn't keep our guys out of the backfield. 2 years from now, that Minnesota game is going to be Khaleke Hudson's highlight tape during the coverage of the 2020 NFL Draft on ESPN. They're just going to be running highlights of what he did to Minnesota his sophomore year. And yet, no holding calls. I watched one of our players get ejected on Saturday night against Minnesota, and I don't know why. Does anyone know why Josh Metellus was ejected? He threw no punch, instigated nothing. All I can think of was you were ejected for playing for Jim Harbaugh. That's why you were ejected. You were ejected for playing for Harbaugh. What did he do? Do you know? I don't know what he did. I have no idea why he was ejected, but he was. Stevie was talking trash. We're going to eject everybody who talks trash. I guess you're ejected. Here's why if you're watching, you were ejected for talking trash while playing for Jim Harbaugh. Because these numbers are BS, Barbara Streisand. Horse pucky, that ain't right. That ain't right. And it goes even beyond the officiating. The way the media treated the Wilton Spate story earlier this year when he was clearly injured, calling Harbaugh a crybaby. Did you read what Angelique Shingelis wrote in the Detroit News from the family? What they went through with their kid having potentially a spinal injury? I see this in my day job a lot. Unfortunately, we that work in news and political media, many of us, right and left, unfortunately, have decided that if we don't like you or your politics, we don't have to do our jobs anymore. We don't have to be fair. We don't have to be professional. We don't have to try and be even accurate. We can even just make feces up. And it's justified because we just hate you that much, and that justifies our own chicanery. I'm seeing the same thing when it comes to Michigan and Harbaugh. Hey, I love me Jimmy, all right? I wore number 4 as a kid. When I used to create myself on NCAA football and then later my own son, I always gave me or my kid number 4. My kid went as Harbaugh for Halloween 2 years ago. All right, Jim's my all-time favorite player. I'm a Jimmy slappy. But I'll say this as a slappy for Jimmy. If Jim weren't my coach, I'd probably be over the top sick of all the coverage he gets. I understand that. What I don't understand is Tim Brando saying, you know what, I don't have to care that your player with the potential spinal injury could not receive the coverage he needed from a healthcare perspective from a school that got $40 million from the Big Ten Network last year in the year 2017 because you didn't give me a depth chart. Now, in deference to Brando, he apologized for that during the game on Saturday night. I give him credit for that. But that is just one of numerous examples now where too many people in sports media have decided they don't have to cover Michigan and Harbaugh fairly because they've just decided they don't like him and he's not worth the coverage that he gets. Well, those are two totally different things. Who cares if you like him? I don't like a lot of people. I probably don't like a lot of you watching right now. Probably a lot of you watching right now don't like me. That's irrelevant. This isn't Mean Girls. We're not in the 7th grade. Do your damn job. You don't get to decide what the truth is based on how much you like somebody. You don't get to decide what the truth is, or professionalism is based on whether or not you think this person's overexposed. Because in that transaction, the only person that is lying and not being professional is you. Now, I have no idea of that which we are seeing in sports media is spilling over into the officiating. I don't know. What I do know, though, is those stats are facts. And what I do know, too, is they're total and complete freaking horse bleep. And that ain't right. And something needs to be done about it. All right, back here on Michigan Podcast, I'm Large Marge. I'm not Large Marge. I just sound like her this week with the sinus infection. Forgive me. As we go inside the huddle with Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider. Good to see you, Michael. How are you?
I'm good, guys. I'm hanging out at the Pizza House Garage Bar right now. We're getting ready to do our football film review here at 6 p.m. So I'm having a good time. The music's on. I got them turned down a little bit. Ready to talk some Michigan football with you guys.
All right, we're looking forward to it as well. Let's start with Michigan darn near made history, Michael. Nearly had two guys rush for 200 yards in the same game. So last week we said, well, it's just Rutgers. This week we're saying it's just Minnesota, right? Is that what we're going to say?
See, I'm not – I definitely think that it was the caliber of the opponent to some degree. At the same time, you know what? They were not executing this way early on in the season against Air Force and Cincinnati and some of the bad teams that they played on their schedule. So I certainly look at it as progress. At the end of the day, you need these type of games in order to put yourself in a position to beat Wisconsin, to beat Ohio State. And so I look at it as a big-time positive that they were able to come out there and do, they essentially ran the same type of power play, pulling the guard, pulling the left and the right guard over and over and over again. The defense knew it was coming, and they couldn't stop it. And so, to me, that's a big-time step forward. Yeah, let's see them do it against Wisconsin and Ohio State. But I'm not going to, poo-poo what they accomplished on Saturday just because it was Minnesota.
We'll get to whether they should have thrown the ball more to continue to develop Brandon Peters in a moment. But here's what I liked about the offensive approach is it's establishing an identity. I all year long, we've wondered, what is this team's identity? Last year, you kind of knew if Michigan got in a hole, you kind of knew what 2 or 3 plays we were going to go to try and dig ourselves out. This year, it seemed as if for most of the season, our coaches were not coordinating an offense. They were just trying things. Let's just try this, see if it works. Who knows? You didn't really know what plays were leading to something else. And it reminds me of what Wisconsin did to us back in Rich Rodriguez's last year in the second half in Ann Arbor of that game. If you recall, they ran like the same play the entire second half. And then I go back to Harbaugh against Pete Carroll when he was at Stanford. And he just ran that counter run with Toby Gerhart over and over and over again because USC could not stop it. That's actually the sort of persona we've been waiting for this team to adopt, isn't it?
No, without a doubt. I think we've been saying for a couple of years now that we want to see Michigan become Stanford. We want to see an overpowering, dominating offensive line that regardless of who the opponent is, they know that they've got 320-pound behemoths that are going to run over you. They've got game-breaking running backs, whether it's Toby Gerhart you mentioned, and Stephen Jackson that played at Stanford that right at the end of Harbaugh's tenure. And we're starting to see that. We're starting to see a little bit of that. And I think that is the identity of this Michigan offense. And the big plays are coming off the running game. The consistent moving the chains is coming off the running game. The other thing that Stanford had that Michigan has not yet developed is obviously a really solid play-action passing game. We saw them try to go to it a couple of times against Minnesota, but they couldn't protect their quarterback when they did. So that was a big handicap to this offense. But that's what they need to develop is continue to develop the downfield passing threat with a solid quarterback. I don't know yet, and we're going to talk about the passing game a little bit. I don't know yet that Brandon Peters is the next Andrew Luck. I think it's way too premature to say something like that. But I certainly think that the running games where they had to establish it, and they are establishing it right now.
When you look at the top teams, the playoff rankings come out tonight, week 2. Likely the top 6 are going to be Georgia, Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Oklahoma, and Miami. Only one of those teams has anything even approaching an All-American quarterback, and that's Baker Mayfield, who's clearly the Heisman frontrunner right now. The rest of those teams, their passing attacks are iffy. Brandon Wimbush, very iffy in the passing game. Jalen Hurts is better this year than he was last year for Alabama when he couldn't throw the ball downfield at all. Jake Fromm is a still developing freshman, and in some of these games, he's barely throwing for 100 yards for Georgia. You look at Miami, they've got an up-and-down passing game that's more predicated on their running game as well. So, this formula, if you can really play defense, and Michigan can really play defense, actually works. And we're seeing it play itself out this year in college football, Michael.
Well, it works if you can play defense and if you can run on whoever you play against. The one thing we don't yet know, and we're not going to know this week against Maryland, is can this running game run on Wisconsin? Can this running game run on Ohio State? It didn't run on Penn State. It didn't run on Michigan State, and then you have 2 losses. And so they've got to be able to run on those really good teams. When you look at Notre Dame has run on pretty much everybody they've seen. Michigan State they ran on NC State. They're going to get a chance against Miami. They've beaten good teams. They lost to Georgia, but they've run on good teams. And Georgia hasn't really had to face a stiff opponent yet. Georgia plays Auburn this weekend. Can Georgia rely on just a running game against Auburn? Can they rely on just a running game against Alabama? And so, yeah, I totally understand what your point is, but some of these teams haven't faced a great opponent yet. Michigan's going to face far better opponents the last 2 weeks of the season, and then we're going to find out how far that running game can take you. My bet is that, listen, if Michigan can run for 200 yards against Wisconsin, Ohio State, they're going to win both those games. More likely, they're going to run for that 120 to 150 range, and their quarterback's going to have to throw for 150 yards or more, and they're going to have to hit some of those plays down the field, which they haven't done the last 2 weeks. And let's face it, it is a bit of a concern. Brandon Peters has been fine for 2 games, but he hasn't been dynamic. He hasn't been a playmaker. And I mean, some they're going to need the quarterback to be more than just a game manager.
When we talk about the running game, I was listening to John Jansen in the postgame, former Michigan All-American offensive tackle on the Michigan radio network, and he was talking about the differences in what they're asking the offensive line to do. More man-ball blocking, less zone blocking, more, hey, we're bigger and stronger than you are, so we're going to pull guys into gaps and just try to maul you and make it very simple for the offensive lineman. The minute a guy in the other uniform comes in across your face, just hit them. Don't worry about combo blocks and all the other things that they clearly could not do early in the season. As you break down the film, how much of those adjustments are what's led to what we've seen the last couple of weeks? How much of it is just the caliber of competition has changed?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I certainly think that you're spot on with when you look at, they found something that Michael Onwenu and Ben Bredesen do well, and that's that they pull, and that when they're pulling and they come around and they find a hole, that the first guy that comes up is the most dangerous man, and that's the guy that I have to hit. And that's what Big Mike and this week Cesar Ruiz did really well. They have figured out that Patrick Kugler is not great at combo blocking up to the second level. So they've kind of started to take a little bit off his plate. They pull more with Patrick Kugler. They're asking him to block one guy. They're asking their tight ends to block a little bit more to the second level because the tight ends have shown an ability to do that. They're asking their wide receivers to block to the second level a little bit more. They're starting to figure out what these guys do well and what they don't do well. And sometimes, honestly, to me, it's a lot more about what they don't do well. And what they don't do well, you can't keep on asking them to do. And I think that has been a big part of this. But I really think when you look at the rushing attack the last 2 weeks, yes, the guards have played well. The tackles are doing a little bit better. John Bushel-Beatty's been a little bit better in the run game. But to me, and I was talking to Benny Jopru about this, former Michigan All-American tight end, and he was saying, when you look at the tight end, and you look at Gentry and McCune, those 2 guys have done such a tremendous job on the outside. They are honestly, Jake Butt was a fine wide receiver, not a great blocker. A.J. Williams was a decent blocker, probably not as good as he should have been for the size he was. We were getting excited about Tyrone Wheat, the junior last year. But right now, you've got probably the 2 best blocking tight ends that I've seen at Michigan in at least a decade.
Michael Spath here with us from the Michigan Insider and WTKA Ann Arbor here on Michigan Podcast. All right, let's talk about Brandon Peters. Are you in the camp of those who said, hey, we needed to give some more opportunities for him to throw the football to develop confidence? Or are you in the camp that says, hey, if they can't stop it, just keep running the ball down their throats?
No, I'm definitely the camp that thinks that they wasted an opportunity because, again, people can get, Stephen, you and I usually pretty much agree on this stuff. And when you look at the Air Force game, the Cincinnati game earlier in the year, and people are like, it's a win. What are you complaining about? But it's not that it's a win. What are you complaining about? Yes, it's great to get a win. But in some of those games, you've got to do other things than just win the football game. Mm-hmm. You've got to develop younger players. You've got to develop a running game. You've got to develop a downfield threat. Because it's not about, yes, it's about winning on that day, but it's also about building to something. And right now, Michigan needs to build to that Wisconsin game and build to that Ohio State game. And if you were to ask me, this week Michigan was playing Wisconsin and not Maryland, how much confidence would you have that they're ready to attack Wisconsin through the air? I would bet 0 because they haven't done it at all. So to me, you had a golden opportunity. Yes, you are shredding Minnesota on the ground. You know what? You know you can do that. You're winning 28-7. They have no chance at this point of coming back on you with the way that your defense is playing. You know that you can go that well if you need to. So why not try to throw the ball down the field? Why not develop the confidence in the passing game? Why not give Brandon Peters some of that successful experience? I don't get that because the only thing that I can think is that Michigan is like, okay, we're going to develop such a strong running game that we're going to win with the running game against Wisconsin and Ohio State. And if they can, terrific. But if they can't, then guess what, Steve? We're screwed.
Mm-hmm. When you take a look at the passing game, was this a step forward for Brandon Peters, a step back, or do you think it was no step at all?
Step.
He just ran the offense.
Yeah, it was a lateral step to me because I didn't see him do anything in this game that I thought was spectacular. The first drive was pretty good, but after that, I mean, what did he really do? The rest of the game, he was 5 for 10 for 20. I think it was 22 yards.
Yeah, he finished with a QBR of 25, I believe, in the game. Yeah.
So to me, it was a lateral step. I think every game he plays, he makes a little bit of progress because of the experience he gets. But in terms of, did he take a huge step forward? No. Did he take a huge step back? No. But he didn't do anything. He didn't even take like a foot forward. It was more like a lateral move to the right. This is a big game for him. Maryland ranks among the worst teams in the country at defending the pass. I think they're maybe 105th or something like that. They're giving up 270 yards per game. You've got to develop a passing game at this point because you're going to need it. I guarantee you're going to need it. They're not going to run for 250 yards against Wisconsin and Ohio State. It's just not going to happen. And if it happens, Steve, then I will come on the show and eat crow.
Statistically, pardon me, puberty. Statistically, Wilton Speight had his best game as a Wolverine against Maryland last year. You're there in Ann Arbor. How much are you buying into he could return this year? Harbaugh was pretty adamant about it in his press conference on Monday that he's throwing this week and he thinks we're closer to his return than we have been. Are you buying into that? What's the scuttlebutt there on the ground in Ann Arbor, Michael?
You know what the scuttlebutt is that he could return for maybe the Ohio State game. And I got to tell you, I would be at a really big kind of, what do you do with that? If Brandon Peters has started the last 4 games, but he's just really managed the game and he hasn't really done anything spectacular, but the running game is pretty decent, do you bring in Wilton Speight and his experience playing this game and give yourselves the best chance to win? I say this, if Michigan wins the next 2 games, if they beat Maryland and they go on the road and beat Wisconsin, then Brandon Peters has got to be your starting quarterback regardless of whether or not Wilton Speight is healthy. If you win this game but you lose at Wisconsin and Wilton Spaight's ready to go, then I think, honestly, you give the guy a chance because unless Brandon Peters comes out there and is just so dynamic in the last 2 games, I think that Wilton Speight, with what he's done, with his experience, probably gives you a better chance against Ohio State than Brandon Peters does.
Karan Higdon started the year 3rd on the depth chart. He's now 60 yards behind Saquon Barkley in season rushing stats here in the Big Ten. What do you make of his development this year, Michael?
I wish we would have seen it a hell of a lot sooner in the season, wouldn't you? I
Yes.
mean, My God, what did he get? 12 carries against Michigan State, and they lost that game 14-10. And he was running pretty hard. What did he get against Penn State? Probably not enough carries. He's been a revelation. At the same time, you saw glimpses of that his first 2 years. He ran the ball hard his freshman year when he got in there. His sophomore year, he is a guy that he's not a 5-tool running back because I don't think he quite has enough of the power. But he's got speed. He's got the home run threat. He can make people miss. He can lower his shoulder and get contact. His blocking is about probably like a B-, maybe a B, so he's got to get better there. But I think Ron Higdon is as close to a complete back as Michigan's had since, honestly, I think you have to go back before Mike Hart. As good as Mike Hart was, he wasn't a home run threat. Fitzgerald Tucson rushed for 1,000 yards in 2011, but I don't think he was as complete of a back as Ron Higdon is. I think you have to go back to maybe Chris Perry to see a back that had as many physical skills as Ron Higdon does. I'm really impressed with this kid. He's going to get 1,000 yards in the next 2 games. He's going to be Michigan's first 1,000-yard back since 2011. I think the sky is the limit for this one. I really, truly believe that next year you go into the year, he's preseason All Big Ten. He could be a 1,500-yard running back. I really think he is something special. And Michigan's waiting a long time for a running back like Ron Higdon.
I think a factor that's not being talked about enough is Quinn Nordine. He's looked shaky the last couple of weeks after he looked like an All-American the first 8 weeks of the year. Now, Alan True of the Michigan Insider reported last week that he was working through some kind of an injury. There was even talk he might not play. So is he banged up? Does he have the Chuck Knobloch yips? What's going on there, Michael?
I think he's got the yips, honestly. If he's injured, then he shouldn't be out there, because if he is injured and he's missing field goals because he's injured, then you're not really doing a disservice to your team to put the guy out there when he's not 100% and that's costing you points. I think it's the yips. I think maybe he's a little banged up, but he's got to get himself back to a good spot. I wonder if Michigan puts themselves in a position here where maybe he can kick like a 35-yarder instead of that 49-yarder that he attempted last week. But yeah, when you miss extra points and you miss multiple extra points in a 3-week period, that's the Chuck Knobloch yips. That's not something else. He's got to do a better job at that. Michigan needs him. So let's face it, beating Wisconsin and beating Ohio State, it could come down to maybe Michigan's got 17 points in that Ohio State game and they're losing 21-17, and they need to have a couple of field goals to beat the Buckeyes. He was such a plus player for the Wolverines the first 6-7 games. He's got to come back to being a plus player for the Wolverines.
Other than Brandon Peters, which player and his development is the most important to Michigan finishing this season with a significant win against either Ohio State, Wisconsin, or both in your mind?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't think it's somebody defensively, because I think we know what we've got defensively, although Cleek Hudson, really what he's showing the last couple of weeks, if he can be a menace off the edge like he was against Minnesota, against JT Barrett, that's going to be big for Michigan. I think you got to go to one of the wide receivers. I think go to Donovan Peoples-Jones or Nico Collins, because they need the downfield threat. They need a playmaker. They're not going to beat the last 2 teams of the season, at least I don't think so, unless they have somebody in the passing game that can create some big plays. I think they're going to win it by dinking and dunking their way down the field. They need somebody to go out there and make some big plays. And my guess is Donovan Peoples-Jones or Nico Collins. If Nico is healthy this week, he rolled his ankle a little bit last week. So to me, that is the biggest development that has to happen right now.
Michael, I have to assume Jim Harbaugh knows more about football than I do, but I have this question to ask.
Or both of us combined, yeah.
This question I have to ask. Why do we throw fades to Grant Perry, Kakoa Crawford, and never to a 6'6" tight end in Zach Gentry? Can you answer that question for me?
Well, we haven't seen it the last couple of weeks, right? We last saw it really against – who did we last see it against? Maybe
Penn State,
Michigan
probably.
State?
Yeah, Michigan State.
We haven't seen it against Penn State. I don't remember.
But we haven't seen them try to match Gentry up there in the end zone at all.
That's mind blowing. It reminded me of like the Lions when they'd get to the red zone a couple years back and they'd have 3 downs and like none of them would go to Calvin Johnson.
Right.
If I'm the Lions, like all 3 of them go to Calvin
Agreed.
Johnson.
Yeah. I'm just going to throw it to that guy who's bigger and faster and jumps higher than you. And if you stop him 3 times in a row, God bless you. You're just better than us, and I'll live with that. Yeah.
I don't think it's part of Jim Harbaugh's offense, though. The last couple of years, Jake Butt is 6'6", and Jake Butt had how many opportunities in the red zone where they just threw the ball up in the air to him? For whatever reason, I don't understand that. You don't understand that. They have this great matchup. They have this great height advantage, and they don't throw the ball to him and say, just go up and get it. if I'm Jim Harbaugh and I'm Brandon Peters and I'm in the red zone, yeah, you can run the football, but if you're at like the 10-yard line, just go tell Zach Gentry to split it wide and throw 3 balls to him. And then one of the 3, if he doesn't come down with it, then shame on us, but he's got to come down with one of those 3. He's got to.
All right, final question, because I know you got to get to work there. Not a win, but success. What's a successful game against Maryland look like on Saturday?
It's holding the Terrapins to 14 points or less. It's the running game going for 250 to 300, doing what they've done the last couple of weeks, because that means that it's not a fluke. It's something they're going to keep doing. And it's big plays in the passing game. They don't need to throw for 300 yards. They don't need to throw for 200 yards. But they need to have 2 or 3 big plays in the passing game, 30-plus yard plays, where Brandon Peters shows that he can throw the deep ball and give at least Wisconsin and Ohio State something to think about in these last couple of games.
Michael Spath from the Michigan Insider and WTKA Ann Arbor. Always good to see you, Michael. Thanks for joining us again this week. This portion of Michigan Podcast brought to you by Sport Court of Michigan. If you're looking to put the ball in your court, like how much would you like that maize and blue Jumpman to be your actual court? Well, Sport Court of Michigan, they can make it happen. From basketball to tennis to batting cages to hoops, if you need anything athletic in your backyard, just give them a call. They're based out of Michigan, and they're ready to install your court sooner than you would expect. If you are in the Southeast Michigan area or in Ann Arbor, Tim Barnes will personally walk you through the process of having your dreams of a professional court in your backyard. Just visit him at sportcourtmi.com. Now, if you live outside of Southeast Michigan and you need a hoop for your driveway or your yard, they've got you covered there too at monsterhoops.com. That's monsterhoops.com, and they'll ship it right to your door. Now, if you mention the Michigan Podcast to monsterhoops.com, you're going to save $100 on your purchase at monsterhoops.com. If you mention Michigan Podcast to sportcourtmi.com, you could save up to $1,000 on your backyard game court, depending on the package you have selected. So sportcourtmi.com, michiganpodcast.com, and for that discount, tell them that Michigan Podcast sent you. This week we added 2 more supporters on our Patreon page. Thank you very much to all of you that are helping to cover the cost it takes to put up this show each and every week here, both on iTunes and also on YouTube. And, we get asked all the time, hey, can you guys produce more content? Yeah, but to do that means we have to move other things out of our schedule that actually pay the bills around here. So the more support we get, the more likely we are to produce more of this content in the future. So if you want to support us, anything at all you can do to say thank you for what you guys do here at Michigan Podcast, just go to patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Now, if you're one of our $5 a month supporters, you get access to my college football point spread picks. I was 11-7 against the spread last week. That's pretty good. We also give you an exclusive post-game audio podcast analysis of each Michigan football game, and I'm going to continue those into the basketball season as well. I don't know that I'll be able to do it for every basketball game, but for most of the basketball games this year, the men's games, I will give you an instant reaction podcast right there on our Patreon page for Michigan Podcast. So thanks to all of you that are supporting us there on Patreon. If you want to support us as well, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. It's now time for this week's edition of Football 101.
Welcome to Football Film Review with Benny Jopra and Michael Spath. Looking back at the Michigan 33-10 victory over Minnesota. And Benny, our first play of the game at 11 minutes to go in the first quarter is a long run by Karan Higdon, and this is going to be a preview of what we continue to talk about the rest of the next 10 to 12 minutes.
Oh yeah, Michigan's going to come out with the extra tackle here. Spinellis in the number 97 jersey lined up at the as the left tight end, and Michigan's just going to run a gap scheme here, and Pogge's going to come and kick out the linebacker, and we catch Minnesota slanting their defensive front. Spinellis gaps down, picks up the backside linebacker, and
Cesar Ruiz
comes around, and there's a guy there for the block, and he kind of slows down, and Higdon says, get out of my way here, and pushes him to the ground, and a 47-yard run as a result.
A great block downfield too by Donovan Peoples-Jones.
Yeah, Donovan Peoples-Jones definitely threw a great block. Good seeing that kind of effort from him downfield.
7:53 to go in the first quarter. Michigan scores its first touchdown of the game on a really nifty play. We've been looking for creative plays. This was a very creative one, getting the ball to Sean McKeon.
So Michigan once again shows the unbalanced formation with the tight end in the tackle position, and the Mason Cole lines up on the right-hand side as a tight end, and McKeon actually is lined up as a tackle, but he's eligible given his location on the line, and he's not covered up. And Michigan's going to roll to the right, and they're going to run people across the field to draw the Minnesota's eyes away from McKeon to the other side of the field, and he just leaks out and catches the ball. Chris Evans making a great block downfield, and the two offensive linemen are just escorting Sean McKeon to the end zone, and he tells the crowd to be quiet.
Yeah, Bredesen makes a great block, gets the guy down on the ground, and then Patrick Kugler doesn't really have someone to block, but great showing the effort to get out in front of Sean McKeon.
Absolutely. Once again, like you said, a really creative play, a wrinkle. They've been showing that formation, for a couple weeks now, and they have a couple other plays off it as well.
About a minute to go in the first quarter, and Michigan has a long 77-yard touchdown run by Karan Higdon here.
Yeah, Michigan, once again, with the counter action in the backfield. Good kick-up block by the pulling guard.
Ben
Bredesen. Everyone hats on hats here for these guys, and a good block by Clit Hill. And these Minnesota defenders get a little out of position here, 2 or 3 guys that are out of position, but that's what the counter action will do, and that's why Michigan keeps on running this counter to let the guards get ahead and have a little more space from the running back, so the running back has a better view of the hole. And this play's been working, and it keeps on working, and it keeps on working the rest of the game.
13:50 to go in the second quarter, and a 12-yard run by Karan Higdon here, Benny, that you really wanted to emphasize because of a lot of things that Michigan does well on this play.
Yeah, so this is the exact same play that Higdon scored earlier on his long touchdown run. And here you're going to see what we call an influence block by Zach Gentry. He's going to fake the defensive end like he's going to block him, and he's going to slip outside to support. And you'll see a window coming around and catches the defensive end off guard after Gentry acted like he was going to block him. Great double team on the front side by Mason Cole and Bredesen. Bredesen gets up with the linebacker. Just a really well blocked play here. Exactly how they draw it up, and we get 10 yards on it.
10:40 to go in the second quarter, and Minnesota have been running a lot of these jet sweeps to success in the first quarter of this game, and finally they go to the well one too many times, and this time Michigan's Tyree Kinnell is in the right spot to take him down.
Yeah, you show Michigan something once, you can catch them on it once, but you're not going to get them on it too many more times. And Kinnell here is lined up 10 yards deep in the secondary, and he sees it coming, and he fires his gun and ends up making a tackle for a 2-yard loss. It's not very often you see safeties making tackles for 2-yard losses, and it's a great to see Michigan safeties getting involved behind the line of scrimmage, being aggressive, and a really good tackle by him as well. And he had a lot of other teammates coming for help, but that's a great play and great instincts there by Kinnell.
Every week, Benny, we seem to feature Maurice Hurst in some capacity. Here he blows up the right guard for a sack.
Yeah, whenever you're thinking to yourself, man, I haven't seen Maurice Hurst yet today. He'll pop up and he makes a play like this. He's been doing it all year long. Michigan's playing cover 2, showing some zone here. And they've been talking about, we need to get pressure with four guys if we're going to play zone. And they get it right here. Hurst completely just bullies Minnesota's right guard and pushes him back into the quarterback for the sack. A great play and something that we have been seeing from him all year. And great to see that we're getting pressure with 4 guys and are able to maybe play a little more zone.
2:40 to go in the second quarter, and a nice 19-yard run for Chris Evans, this time with Patrick Kugler, Michigan's center, pulling around the left side.
Yeah, Michigan's going to trying to get outside here. Ian Bunting does a pretty good job on the end, but it doesn't allow Kugler to get outside of him, and the Minnesota player shows. Kugler throws a great block, chops the Minnesota defender Chris Evans puts his foot in the ground and cuts it up. Really nice read by him and picks up 10 to 12 yards on the play. Michigan showing Minnesota something different besides the gap power scheme.
So if Bunting gets the block and pushes that guy back inside, this is trying to outflank him. As it turns out, he can't. He does a good job blocking, but he can't. And so Chris Evans reads the play, like you said, puts his foot in the ground and takes it upfield.
Absolutely, and that's the purpose of the play, and that's why they block it like this. So there are some options. If you don't get outside, then you can always try to cut it up. But I mean, Chris Evans makes that cut. He doesn't stop running. He doesn't slow down. He makes that cut, and that's why he's successful.
12:02 to go in the third quarter, and we haven't really gotten into him yet, but Khaleke Hudson has a Michigan program record, 7.5 tackles for loss out of his Viper position, and here is the key sack, because this is the one that they call intentional grounding. Michigan went back and gave him a sack on this play.
Yeah, so Don Brown, every week he seems to be freeing up one guy the entire game. It was Devin Bush earlier in the year, and this game it was definitely Khaleke Hudson here. And Don Brown just brings him off the edge. He outnumbers Minnesota. Khaleke Hudson comes off the edge untouched, athletic enough to not let the opposing quarterback get out of his grasp, and drags him down and draws the intentional grounding.
Here, 9:50 to go in the third quarter, and a young right guard in there, true freshman, Cesar Ruiz, and this is a communication error, and it leads to a big hit on his quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, Ruiz played great all game. He's been flying around the field. We've seen him 20 yards downfield trying to make blocks. We dominating the line of scrimmage. And here he just doesn't stay on the guy here. I think what he's thinking is a twist is coming when he sees a defensive lineman move, and it doesn't end up happening, and he just completely abandons his guy, and Peters takes a hit. That looked a little scary at first, but he was able to come back. But Ruiz here, he's young. This is his one glaring error in the day. And other than this, he played fantastic, and he'll learn from this, I can guarantee you.
Well, he better, because Michigan, the one thing they have to shore up big time going to Wisconsin, Ohio State is their pass protection. 3:35 to go in the third quarter here, Benny, and Michigan just keeps on pulling that guard. This time it's John Runyon Jr. who's filling in for Cesar Ruiz on Cron Higgins' 5-yard touchdown run.
Yeah, Michigan, they've been doing a great job with this all game. And this season, especially down here in the 5-yard line, they love to run this. The front side is just going to gap down. Spinellis is in there playing tight end. He does a good job. Ian Bunting does a good job. Runyon pulls around. He gets submarine in the hole, but his defender basically takes himself out of the play by doing that. And Higdon, battles his way into the end zone here for Michigan's touchdown. And we've seen this every week now where Michigan's running power here down the goal line.
I think you just called this the don't block anybody play and let 8 guys from Michigan compete to make the tackle.
Yeah, they continue. Minnesota kept on trying to run this, spread option against us, and it's the third quarter now, and they're still trying to do it. And it's not going to work anymore, especially coming out of halftime with a Don Brown defense. And here they just don't block anybody. And Thurbush is, right there to make the play along with about 7 other guys. It just shows you the swarming capability of this defense. If you make a mistake against our defense, we're going to capitalize for sure. And you can't do it against us. And Minnesota did it a couple times on offense this game. We had a lot of tackles for loss behind 13. The line of scrimmage.
1:48 to go in the third quarter. Chris Evans on a 67-yard touchdown run. Benny, he is the first player from Michigan to have 2 50-plus yard touchdown runs in one game since Denard Robinson in 2012.
Wow. Great play here. Back to the counter again. Great block here by Gentry, the tight end. He's been doing a fantastic job along with the other tight ends the last couple of weeks. Washes down the defensive end. Bredesen's in a pull from the backside, come around for the linebacker, and the linebacker kind of takes himself out of the play by going inside of Bredesen, spilling the ball to the safety, who Chris Evans somehow makes missing the hole. Great athleticism. Chris Evans shows his speed here. Good blocks downfield.
Eddie McDoom had a great block to help set it up.
Eddie McDoom had a great block, and Chris Evans shows his speed once again into the end zone.
This week's Twitter poll results here at Michigan Podcast. I put out this question. I'm putting the odds of the Big Ten being left out of the college football playoff at 70%. I asked you, are you taking the over or the under? Wow. No Big Ten homers out there, at least very few. 67% of you. said you think the odds are even higher than 70% that the Big Ten will be left out of the college football playoff, which tells me a lot of you believe somebody's going to beat Wisconsin, maybe even Michigan. That brings us to this week's question of the week. And it comes from Brandon Spurl, who asks, do you think it's possible an undefeated Wisconsin could be left out of the college football playoff? I do. Now, I wouldn't say it's likely, but I wouldn't say it's improbable either. So tonight, we're going to have the second round of rankings. My guess is Wisconsin will be 7th or 8th. Well, if you look at the teams ahead of them, most of them are not playing each other. Notre Dame and Miami do this weekend, and then that's it, except for Alabama and Georgia, the top 2 teams. So, I mean, if right now you think several one-loss teams are better than Wisconsin, let's look at Notre Dame, for example. They still play Miami. They still play Stanford. They still play Navy. All 3 of those are arguably better teams than Wisconsin will close with against, in terms of a threesome. I'm not saying that Navy and Wake Forest are better than Michigan and Iowa, but when you add them to Miami, that's better than playing Michigan and Iowa. So if you think Notre Dame's better than Wisconsin now and Notre Dame wins all those games, how do you jump Wisconsin over them? What if it's Miami that wins out? Well, if you got Miami higher than Wisconsin right now and you think and Miami wins out, which includes the ACC championship, why do you think they're better? Or if it's, say, Clemson. Now, Clemson and Miami could play each other. We don't know that for sure yet. That's why I didn't mention that one previously. Well, if you already think Clemson is better than Notre Dame and Wisconsin and Clemson wins out, why all of a sudden would you think Wisconsin's better than Clemson? Doesn't make much sense to me. I think the Big Ten's in a lot of trouble. Now, I don't believe Wisconsin's going to win out. I think they will lose at least once, maybe twice, the rest of the way. But yeah, I think all your old paradigms, I get questions about the college football playoff rankings all the time, and they're almost always from the premise of how the old polls used to work. Well, if you win, you move up. If you lose, you move down. If you're undefeated, you're number 1. It's not that way anymore. All right, we have a committee. They don't take a look at bad losses as much as they do good wins. They value head-to-head heavily as much as they can. Now, when you're in a situation like we had this week where Auburn beat Mississippi State, which beat LSU, which beat Auburn, well, when you have that triumvirate of teams, it's difficult to determine how to apply the head-to-head. So, it didn't necessarily line up in that case. But I think the Big Ten's odds of making the college football playoff right now are on life support, and the heartbeat is fading. Speaking of the Big Ten, these would be my power ratings for this week, 1 through 14. This guy got Sparty number 1. I can't even believe I'm freaking saying that, man. But I can't even. Let me try that again. Let me try it again, see if I can enunciate it better. My number 1 team in our Big Ten power ratings are. I got Sparty number 1. Sparty. Let me try it one more time. Okay. Let me try and be at least a little professional here. There you can see my Big Ten power ratings, and I've got. I guess my number 1. So I give up. Let's go to if I was on the college football playoff committee. This would be my top 4 this week: Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, and Notre Dame. I'd have Oklahoma and Miami on deck. Which conference is not there? Big Ten. Here's the other problem the Big Ten has, guys. The league has one good non-conference win this year. One. Iowa winning at Iowa State. That is the only quality non-conference win in the entire conference, guys. Northwestern got destroyed by Duke. Michigan's win over Florida. Florida now looks like the worst team Michigan beat in the non-conference. So, I mean, across the board, the league doesn't have the resume. And we don't really know how. So here's why that matters. Since they don't have a lot of good non-conference wins, when they all beat each other, we don't really know how good they truly are then. We don't know if that's parity or if that's overall strength of the league because they don't have the out-of-conference resume that clarifies that for us. Finally, if I had to vote in the Heisman Trophy, to me, it's Baker Mayfield by a bullet. And I had a hard time coming up with 2 other names right now. I mean, Saquon Barkley has been Saquon bottled up the last 2 weeks, but because of what he's done up until this point, I'll still put him in the top 3. And I'll give some love to Jonathan Taylor of Wisconsin. who's got a very, very bright future, only a true freshman, but he's going to play a couple of defenses that are going to force him to run against 8 or 9 in the box a lot down the stretch here, and then we'll see how he does. Hey, thanks for bearing with me this week with the sinus infection and the fading voice. Thanks for tuning in here on Michigan Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube, on iTunes as well. I want to thank our partners at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping us get the word out and spreading the word about Michigan Podcast every week. Until next week, go Blue.